Hey, this is Josh Bryant here with Fred Hatfield. We're very honored today to get to interview one of the true lifting legends, and also, in my opinion, the greatest strength author of all time. Fred, I wanted to ask you, first off, how did you get involved with lifting weights? And I wanted to hear a little bit about your strength career outside of powerlifting, if you were doing Olympic lifting, bodybuilding, odd lifts, anything like that.
Oh, okay. Good to be here with you, Josh. I started lifting weights about at age 12, give or take. I remember walking home from school one day, and I walked past an open garage with with 4 or 5 kids inside lifting this old York set of barbells. And I stopped and I was watching them, kind of fascinated by it all. I had never seen barbells before. And the kids called me over. They were all older than me, quite a bit older, like they were teenagers, and I was like 12. And they said, "Think you could lift this?" And I said, "Sure." So I lifted it off the ground up to my shoulders, and I pressed it overhead about 4 or 5 times and put it back down. And I looked around at all of the kids, and their jaws were down on the ground. They couldn't believe what they had just seen me do, because not a one of them could lift the weight. And I don't know how much it was, but I think it was around 125 pounds or 135 pounds or whatever. And it was pretty light for me. So I've always been a strong kid. I grew up on a farm, working my fool head off, baling hay and throwing sacks of grain around and things like that. So I was a pretty strong fella. And I really liked lifting that weight, and I went back up to the farm where I lived at the orphanage, and I got a couple of tires and filled them with cement and put a bar in between them, and that was my first barbell. And that's what I practiced on most of my teenage years. Was that old set of concrete filled tires. And
okay, go ahead.
It wasn't real sophisticated, but it was heavy, and that's really the whole point, isn't it? So
absolutely.
By the time I was a senior in high school, I was a pretty strong fellow. I entered my first weightlifting competition, and that night, my first bodybuilding competition. And I won Teenage Mr. Connecticut, and I broke all of the state records in the press snatch, clean and jerk, and total. And it's all been downhill since then.
Do you remember what your lifts were?
Oh, no, I can't remember that. I have no clue. And so I got my start in Olympic weightlifting, and I stayed with Olympic weightlifting all the way through the Marine Corps and all the way through college and graduate school, in fact. And I was ranked amongst the top 3 Olympic lifters in the country for years. But I could never make it into the number 1 spot not because I wasn't strong enough. I had all the strength in the world. I couldn't hold the weight overhead. And the reason that I couldn't was because my arms don't lock out. If I straighten my arm out as much as I can, it looks like a dog's hind leg. So that means that I had to hold the weight on with muscle, instead of like all of the other guys who were able to hold the weight overhead bone on bone, because their arms would extend perfectly straight or even slightly hyperextend, meaning that there was little or no effort on their part to hold the weight overhead. And I just couldn't get good enough to do it. I could power clean 425 pounds, but I could only jerk 375 overhead at the most, So I was really hamstrung by that. And I tried out for the Olympic team in '76, and I didn't do very well, and I was really bummed out. And I said, all right, well, now it's time for me to make up my mind what it is I want to do. I certainly didn't want to continue on placing third or missing out on an Olympic team or something like that. That wasn't a part of my mentality. And there was a brand new sport in town called powerlifting. And I said, I'll try that. And inside of a year, I was breaking world records. So I found my niche, so to speak. And, I since that first time, which I believe was 1976, if I'm not mistaken, when I broke my first world record, or 77, right in there. I've broken over 30 world records and won 3 different world championships over the span of my career.
20 different world championships to win.
I'm sorry?
That's in the days, too, when there wasn't 20 different world championships to win.
Yeah, right. There was one. Yeah, I love it. I love it nowadays. You know, I go up and ask a kid, hey, how you doing in your powerlifting? And he says, I was world champion this year. And I go up to the next kid and say, how'd you do? And, I was world champion this year. Come to find out, there's like 20 different world champions out there. And it ought not be that way. I'm sorry. None of them are lifting anywhere near the amount of weight that I lifted. And so something's gone wrong in this country with strength training. I don't know what it is. And I think a part of it has to do with all of the gear that powerlifters wear nowadays. They look like circus clowns, for heaven's sakes. When they come out on a platform to lift a weight, they're all bound up. They can barely move. And they've got these suits on that are triple ply denim, for heaven's sakes, that have no give to them whatsoever. So they've got to actually put 500 pounds on their back just to get down into the hole. You know what I'm saying?
I've seen it with people can't get down with 1,000 pounds into the hole.
Yeah, it's just crazy. It's gotten stupid. And these guys, I can't blame the guys because they're doing it because everybody else is doing it, and they can't not do it because they would give up a huge advantage. But I blame the leaders in this sport, and they should never have let that happen, but they did. And the state of affairs now is that these guys are competing in something which is not a sport; it's a circus sideshow. And
absolutely. In your opinion, is that why the physiques have sort of suffered? Because if you look at the powerlifting USA from the 1980s, a lot of the guys, even in the heavier weight classes, almost look like off-season bodybuilders. Now, I mean, it's more reminiscent of like a beer-drinking truck driver or something.
Yep. You're absolutely right about that, Josh. And about 6 or 8 months ago, I did an interview with Donnie Thompson. I don't know if you know who he is.
Yeah, I'm friends with him. Yep. Yeah,
legitimately strong fella, nicest guy in the world, and very, very strong. So his comment to me was, "What would you tell the guys, Fred? Coming into this sport right now?" And I just looked at him square in the eye, and I said, "I'd tell them to take their clothes off." And he goes, "What? What are you talking about?" So. Then we got into it with the uniforms. And I said, when you can take your clothes off and beat me, then you can legitimately call yourself the world champion. But until then, you're just a circus clown.
Well, I think one positive in the last maybe 4 years or so, the majority of the meets seem to be a majority raw now. Like I'd say about 7, at least in Texas, about 80% of lifters are raw now. I think people have kind of had enough.
I hope so. I would love to see things go back to the way they were. And you're right. The guys back in the 70s and 80s were much, much stronger and much, much better shape than the guys of today. And it's just a shame to see.
Speaking of powerlifting, what are your best lifts in say the gym and in competition? I know you said you did anything notable. Like I know you did the 425 power clean. besides, your best lifts in competition, tell us about some of your gym lifts.
Oh, wow. I was never big at doing gym lifts because, I wanted to save myself for the competitions. But every once in a while, I'd do something big. I've done an 1,100-pound squat, 500 kilograms.
Wow.
In the gym, and my best bench, I guess, was around 550, right in there somewhere, which is about the same as I did in competition. And then working out one day up in Portland, Oregon, with Doyle Kennedy, the late great Doyle Kennedy. I pulled 825 like a piece of cake, and
wow.
I had 850 up to my knees. So I did a lot more in the gym for deadlifting than I ever did in the meet. And all I can say is, I wasn't having an arthritic flare up in my hand, which is why I wasn't able to deadlift very well. I could pull a ton if I was wearing straps, and but I had an arthritis problem in my hand that flared up every single meet. And the reason for it, of course, was hanging onto the bar during the squat. My wrist and hands would get jacked out of shape, and it would flare the arthritis up so that I wasn't able to hang onto the bar during the deadlift. But my best deadlift in a competition was, I believe, 777 pounds, something like that. And but I've done, like I said, well over 800, 8.25. And I wasn't even wearing straps that particular day, so it was a legit lift.
Excellent. What powerlifting accomplishment are you most proud of? I mean, you have 30 world titles. I mean, what are you most proud of?
Well, I suppose, I never even thought of it in terms of being proud or anything, but I was 45 years old and 255 pounds when I did my best lifting, and that's the oldest and the lightest of anybody who ever squatted 1,000 pounds by far and away.
Absolutely.
I thought that was a pretty good feat.
I would have to agree. Were you? I think one thing a lot of people, don't pay enough attention to is compensatory acceleration training. I'm just curious if you could explain this to everybody and how you came up with the concept originally, and like how important do you think this concept is when you're after maximum strength? Well,
it's like beyond critical. Is all I can tell you. I can't even imagine having broken any of my records without compensatory acceleration training. And the reason for it is very, very simple and straightforward. If I want to lift 1,000 pounds off the floor, I have to exert more than 1,000 pounds against the bottom of that bar. Otherwise, if all I did was 1,000 pounds of force against that bar, the bar would stand motionless. So in order to make it move, I've got to do more than 1,000 pounds. You get me?
Absolutely.
Now, so when you do the mathematics, you're going to find out that somewhere less than 90%, typically 80 or 85%, or even less than that, is where I would be able to exert the greatest amount of power against the bottom of the bar. Force times distance divided by time. And the amount of power that I exert against an 800-pound bar is up around 12 or 1,300 pounds. I couldn't do that with a 1,000-pound bar. Do you follow me? So I'm getting far better overload by compensatorily accelerating the bar throughout the total range of motion than I ever could with even a heavier weight. So I'm getting better overload. I'm getting better quality of time under tension, and I'm not suffering any risk of injury because the weights are fairly light. Why wouldn't I lift that way? It just doesn't make any sense not to lift that way.
I agree, and I think a lot of people they pay, they're paying so much attention to what accessory movement, this and that they're trying to do, but they're missing the point of the compensatory acceleration training. Cause they really do miss it. I've been preaching it all my life to anybody who would listen to me, and very few guys listen. They think they have the answer for themselves. That's one of the funny things about lifters here in the United States, and why the Russians are kicking their butts nowadays, is because everybody thinks they're an expert. Just shut up and listen to the guys who know what they're talking about, which typically it's going to be guys like me with advanced degrees and who have studied it their entire lives. You can learn a thing or two from an old guy like me. But they don't want to do that. They want to do it their way. And it's a matter of pride, or it's a matter of arrogance. I don't know what you would call it, or why the guys don't listen and do things in the best way that science has to offer, which is, without a doubt in my mind, compensatory acceleration. And I don't know why they won't do it. And Louis Simmons, with his group of guys, they practice compensatory acceleration. Louis learned that from me. And Louis got one of the highest ranking teams in the history of the sport. So it's not just me, It's Louis and his boys as well, who finally learned how to train, Absolutely. Did you? So I know you've not only been, one of the premier strength athletes of all time, you've trained a lot of high-level clients too. So you use compensatory acceleration training with your clients too. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Every single one of them. It didn't matter what sport.
Even, is there application of bodybuilding?
Well, yes. I'm going to say yes, but not all the time. I developed a system of bodybuilding, which, for lack of a better name, I call it ABC training, which is it's a variable multiple split system of training. And who's the fellow that did? I can't remember the name of that magazine out of Vegas. Do you remember?
Recent or?
No, in the past. Shoot, I think of it. But anyway, long story short, this variable split training, or multiple variable split training, never really caught on. But amongst those with whom it did catch on, they found that they're making much, much better gains. And on A training days, ABC, the A training day involved speed training, similar to compensatory acceleration. And so it has a place in bodybuilding. I certainly wouldn't do it all the time, because there are other factors involved besides just strength in the sport of bodybuilding.
But you're going to improve inter and intramuscular coordination, all those kind of stuff. That's definitely going to help any bodybuilder, so it makes sense with the compensatory acceleration training. Have you ever used, when you're back to the ABC system of periodization, have you ever tried that with any kind of strongman at all?
What, an ABC system with strongmen?
Yeah.
No, I really haven't. It just wouldn't make any sense to do it. Maybe a little in the off season if they're looking for some more muscle mass or something like that. But typically, no.
Okay.
And let me tell you why. Without getting too scientific,
sure.
The biggest element in bodybuilding, modern technology of bodybuilding, is in fiber fusion. You want to get a proliferation of satellite cells, and then through careful periodization, allow these satellite cells to proliferate, and also the type 2B muscle fibers, very explosively fast twitch fibers. And now what happens when you do explosive movements with your 2B fibers, they get destroyed, or they splinter apart. They just break up because they're twitching so fast and so hard and so violently that they literally tear themselves apart. They then fuse with surrounding satellite cells, and the result is a much larger muscle cell. No greater number of nuclei, not any stronger per se, but a much larger cell. And that's the whole point of bodybuilding. And that's the end-all, be-all in the science of bodybuilding in this modern era, is to get satellite cell proliferation and fiber fusion. And you do that with something akin to an ABC system, which periodizes your training in such a way that type 2B fibers are allowed to proliferate. If you're hanging and banging all the time and you're lifting heavy weights and doing a lot of negative reps and stuff like that, you never get a chance to develop type 2B fibers because you're always destroying them. And so, therefore, you're not going to get the same level of fiber fusion. You need those 2B fibers. Absolutely. And the easiest way to get those 2B fibers is to sit down and do nothing. Well, you can't do nothing in bodybuilding because detraining would cause a diminution in size. So what you do is an A and a B workout in order to maintain or improve size slightly, and then you take that C workout, which emphasizes heavy eccentric movement, and you purposefully cause a massive disruption or destruction, I should say, of those 2B fibers, which again then fuse.
Is that what you used when you were training Lee Haney's AB system of bodybuilding periodization?
Yes, it is. I trained Lee for like 4, 5, 6 years, something like that. And I don't know if you remember, excuse me, Lee won Mr. Olympia one year, weighing 224 pounds, and he looked emaciated to me. I don't know, ripped up, and he had a real nice physique with the skinny waist and all that kind of stuff and broad shoulders. But the following year, he came in weighing 245, 250, and he was way more muscular, way more cut up, and much, much bigger. And that was the Lee Haney that went on to win, a total of 5 or 6 more Mr. Olympias. Nobody could beat him at that point.
Absolutely. Back to powerlifting, did you do any kind of partial overloads at all when you're powerlifting at all?
Partial overloads? I don't know what that means.
Like rack walkouts, partial squats, anything like that to handle?
Oh, I didn't do any partials.
Did you ever train any high reps?
In overhead presses, I did some partial presses. But not for deadlift or squatting. But what I did do is I did what they call overloads, where you walk out of the rack with about 120% of your best effort. So for me, that was somewhere around 1,200 pounds. And I just stand there and hold it for the count of 10 and put the weight back down and maybe do it once or twice more. And that's only during the last 10 days of training prior to a competition. I did little or no lifts in the last 10 days, just some overloads in order to key up my nervous system to handle a heavy weight and without getting surprised at how heavy the weight was on competition day. It was more of a nervous system tune-up.
And how close would you actually do that to meet them?
Inside of 10 days. Maybe as little as 5 or 6 days.
Okay.
The last week prior to a competition, I did nothing. Now, why would I not do anything? I want those to be fibers because they're the ones that are going to lift the heavy weights.
Did you use bands or chains at all?
You know, back in the 50s and early 60s, bands and chains were around. We tried it all. I summarily dismissed them all after trying them enough time to tell me that compensatory acceleration was vastly superior to bands and chains.
Did you yourself like market and sell some bands in the 70s or something?
I used, yeah, but not for what you may think. You know,
Okay.
it looked like a huge elastic band.
Okay.
It was a closed loop, like a rubber band. And basically, what I used to do with my athletes, I put them inside, and they would hold the bands tight on their waist, and I would take the other end of the band and sling them back and forth. And their job was to outrun the band as the band was pulling them, and then to stop before momentum carried them into a stretch. Their momentum of movement made them stretch the band. In other words, they had to outrun the band, and then they had to stop before the band caught up with them. You see what I'm saying? And so it was a great way for developing agility, quickly being able to move left and right. It was an overspeed drill, basically, forcing them to move faster than they could voluntarily move, both starting and stopping in opposite directions.
Now, back to compensatory acceleration training, some people try to come out against it. Will say that the issue with it's the negative acceleration phase, and you're having to stop too quick at lockout, so you're kind of programming your central nervous system to stop early when you're starting. You know what I'm saying? At the end of the range of motion, how would you combat that?
Well, there are two things. First of all, you don't want to go so light that you're going to get significant lockout trauma.
Sure.
You know, the weight is still heavy, and you're not moving it so fast that it's going to create a problem with ballistic stress. But then the second thing is, that's another thing that I used to use bands for. I would dampen the end point, the last few inches of movement in any given lift, dampen it with elastic band so that that wouldn't happen. They can go hard against the elastic without causing any kind of ballistic shock to their muscles or joints. You follow what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
It was a damping effect that I used the bands for.
Now, would you put the bands tight enough where it put tension throughout the entire range of motion, or would it just kind of catch toward the end?
Just at the end.
Okay. So that'd be the difference between what you were doing and a lot of people are doing now. You had it just to help catch at the end so you could continue pushing versus overspeeding, eccentric, and all that. Okay.
I got to the point where I didn't really have to do that because I was lifting a heavy enough weight where the speed of movement at the end point was not significant, and there was little if any danger of stress.
Well, I think the learning curve for it's not rocket science either. So
that's right. There's a learning curve, and any good athlete will learn it in 2 tries.
One of my probably favorite books of all time is Power: A Scientific Approach. I've read it a couple of different times. I think you touch on something that I don't know why people don't talk much about today, but you were talking about inhibiting neural factors that have negative impacts on strength. How do you think people that are after maximum levels of strength can apply those concepts to their own training?
Oh, you're going to have to refresh my memory.
Well, you're talking about compensatory acceleration training and things like that can actually inhibit, sort of like the neural factors that are going to have negative impacts on your strength. Because, say for instance, we're talking about compensatory acceleration training. When you're, locked out bench press, your triceps are the prime mover and your biceps are the opposing muscle. But if you keep compensatory accelerating the weight, the biceps are not going to act as quickly, kind of like reciprocal inhibition. So that kind of stuff. So any of the neural limiting factors on max strength, how do you think you can help, inhibit those factors? If that makes sense.
We've already touched upon some of that. First of all, the weight is going to be heavy enough where you don't have to worry about ballistic shock at the end of the movement. And knowing that in your own mind, and after having tried it a few times and satisfying yourself that there's no danger, no imminent danger from explosive lockout, that is one of the inhibiting factors in regards to inhibiting some kind of neural shutdown, reciprocal inhibition, as you call it. The other one is the bands. Just putting the band in such a way that it in the last couple of inches slows the movement down, it dampens the movement in such a way that you're not going to get any ballistic shock at the end of the movement. It's almost like doing a double backflip in the air, 20 feet in the air, and instead of landing on the floor, you land on a nice, soft, cushy crash pad. Mm-hmm. You're not going to hurt yourself. So, the rubber bands acted as a crash pad, more or less.
Absolutely. And I want to know a little bit about ISSA. Is ISSA offering college classes now and AA degrees?
Yes. We are accredited college now with a 2-year degree, and I'm so proud of that. We the guys that are working at ISSA, especially my partner, Dr. Shalaria, and our COO, Patrick Gamboa, have done just a remarkable job pulling everything together. And you have to realize how difficult it is to become accredited. We had to go through 100 different hoops, each one of which was a monumental effort on the part of many, many people, experts all in several different fields of study. So I'm extremely happy and excited about it, and of course ISSA, as usual, was the first ever to do that, and we're not stopping there. We're going to go on and on.
I have another kind of off-topic story I heard about on the internet that I thought was kind of funny, so I wanted to ask you about it. Saw something that you were studying over in Russia, and you ended up having some Olympic lifter there challenged you to some kind of squat off for a bottle of vodka.
Yeah. That was fun.
What happened?
His name was Marchuk. Marchuk was a 325, 335-pound guy. He had just broken Alexiev's record in the clean and jerk. So clearly he was just an amazingly powerful man. And, when someone told him who I was and what I had lifted, he looked at me and looked me up and down and goes, "Nyet." And, of course, I took exception to that. So his coach came running up and said, Fred, you must not beat Marchuk, because if you beat him, everybody in the gym will think he is shit." That's exactly what he said. So, as fortune would have it, while I was there in Russia, I went there right after a meet in Hawaii where I tore my quadricep. So I was on crutches with a blown out leg, and so I wasn't able to do any kind of serious squatting. But something told me I better give it a shot anyway, and so I told Marchuk I'd throw my crutches on the ground, and I said I'll beat you, even though I have crutches, even though I have to walk on crutches. So the following day we had a competition, and we went up to 800 pounds. He did a high bar squat with 800 pounds, stood up with it, with tremendous effort, and then just threw it off his back. And he said, "Here, you try it now, Dr. Squat," he goes. So I did it with no trouble, of course. And that's where the competition ended. I could have done more. I was afraid to do more because I had a blown quad, but I still managed the 800 with little or no effort. And so that night, he and Bill Reynolds was able to speak fluent Russian, so I dragged him along with me. And the three of us sat in Marchuk's apartment and just drank several bottles of vodka and became fast friends.
Gotcha. You have any other funny stories you want to share with people?
Oh, wow.
These are as great as the training, so these are awesome.
I have so many stories. I don't even know where to begin. That's one that I hardly ever think about. But when you brought it up, I was able to speak about it. But when you ask me, cold, what are some of the other stories? I never really gave it any thought. You know what I'm going to have to do? Josh, I'm going to have to sit down one of these days and just jot down short notes for all of these stories that really are fun stories, and I don't want them to be lost to time by any means. Some of them are really funny.
That'd be awesome. Is there anything further you want to add, Fred?
Oh God, I could sit here and talk about it until the cows come home. Nothing I would rather do than talk strength. Let me just add a couple of things that I think are like so important that every school child ought to be learning about them.
Please.
You see, and the whole thing centers around a simple concept called movement. Now, everybody on planet Earth has to move. We do so in a variety of different ways. We run, we walk, we hop, we jump, we skip, we roll, we tumble, we do all kinds of movements. And we lift things, we throw things, we hit things with clubs, and all of them, even our heart beats, and that beat of a heart constitutes a movement, does it not? Sure it does, because the left ventricle contracts and pushes the blood out, and then it relaxes, and more blood flows in, and then it contracts again. So you've got this movement going on. And if you were to take all of the movements that are available to man, I don't care if it's a single step in the act of running or walking, or swinging a club, the blink of an eye, or the beat of a heart, all movements, if you were to put them on a piece of paper, they would all look the same, and it's called the strength curve. It is virtually ubiquitous. This is all we as animals on planet Earth can do of a physical nature. Some people even think that way, but that's all we can do. And it looks like a check mark. You go down and you come up. You rear back and you throw. Your foot hits the ground, your knee bends, and then you push off in preparation for the next step, and so forth. And it looks like a check mark. That's called a strength curve. Now there are, and here's what every high school or every grade school kid ought to learn. There are only 7 ways that you can change that strength curve and improve upon it. 7 different things that you can do. That's all, only 7. Any school kid can learn 7 things.
Absolutely.
It's so simple. But, I won't bother getting into them except to quickly list them, You can increase the tempo from going down to up. In other words, making it look more like a check mark than a sideways S. Right? That amortization zone or the transition from down to up should be a sharp point, not a nice, lazy sideways S. You follow what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the single most difficult and most dangerous part of the strength curve, and so therefore should be done near the end of your training period, working on starting strength and explosive amortization, going from down to up. You don't want to hurt yourself. That's why you do it at the end of your training cycle. And you can increase the angle of Q, the steepness of the angle going upwards after your knee bends and you push off for the next step. That push off, the angle of the incline is called the angle of Q. You can increase acceleration. You can increase the amount of force that you exert, and you can decrease the amount of time it takes to exert it. So these 7 different elements are easy to learn, and because they are ubiquitous, because there is nothing else you can do on planet Earth, you need to learn them, and you need to learn how to augment each one. That's how you get strong. There is no other way. That's the whole point behind compensatory acceleration training. That's the whole point behind the invention of the dumbbell and the barbell. Without the dumbbell and the barbell, your movements are over with so quickly that there's no overload. That's why we have dumbbells in our hands, to slow the movement time down and to such a degree that we can have enough time to get maximum force output. Do you follow me?
Absolutely.
And it's simple things like this that if everybody were to learn them, there would never be any misunderstanding on how to get stronger. There's only 7 things you can do, you know. And yet I watch guys in the gym doing these crazy things, not a one of which is orientated towards or has any effect upon any one of those 7 elements. They're just wasting your time.
Now, back to compensatory acceleration training, we're just talking about that. What would you say to people, you know, a lot of, you know, manufacturers of machines and people like that claim they've invented machines that do complement the strength curve? I mean,
well, quite a few years ago, there was a machine out called a mini gym. Yep. I don't know if many people will remember it, but basically it was isokinetic in nature. That is to say, no matter whether you apply 5 pounds of force or 500 pounds of force, the bar would move at the same rate of speed. Now, these isokinetic machines have definite value in one's training, but your body doesn't move isokinetically, with the possible exception of swimming against the resistance of water or bicycling against the resistance of pedals. You know, and even then, it's only partially isokinetic. So, but it's not a natural way to train. Let's put it that way. But it does have value. You know, but when you start talking to me about elastic bands being isokinetic, or when you talk to me about trying to using the chains in order to increase the amount of weight at the upper ranges of motion in the squat, for example, or in a bench press, it's much easier just to do compensatory acceleration. You know, why would I even mess with a band or a chain or an elliptical cam, for that matter? So I'm not a real big believer in machine training to begin with. But when they start giving me their mumbo jumbo at how scientific their elliptical cam is, and you know, how it approximates the human movement curve, I just tend to turn around and go the other way, and because I've been through it all. You know, an old friend of mine, a guy by the name of Murph, said to me once, "Lift something heavy." That's what weight training is all about, isn't it? Lift something heavy. Of course, you know, you want to lift it with explosive force every inch of the way to get the most out of it that you can. But you can't do that with machines. You tear the machine apart, and they'll kick you out of the gym to boot. And some screwball with no degree at all is going to come over to you and tell you got to go slow, move slow. Haven't you ever heard that before?
How did that whole thing about going slow like that start? I mean, is that I'm 32 years old, so I don't know the whole history of everything, but
it started with Arthur Jones.
First come around, and how?
It started with Arthur Jones and a group of ardent disciples of Arthur's teaching that called themselves the Hitmen, HIT, High Intensity Training. And they believe that by going real slow, you know, you're going to get a better quality overload. Nothing could be further from the truth. but they argued it, and it was part of Arthur Jones's belief system because he was the developer of the line of equipment back then called Nautilus machines.
Yeah.
Not the same as the Nautilus of today, but different. And Arthur copied an old German design that was developed by German kinesiologists or physical therapists that used elliptical cams to improve the overload in the stronger ranges of motion. From the middle of the 1850s, that's how old these elliptical cams are. Elliptical cam machines, weight training machines, are 100 years older than a adjustable dumbbell and barbell. In fact, the adjustable dumbbell and barbell is the newest weight training equipment on the market today, if you can believe that.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah. All of the other machines are predicated upon much earlier designs. I've seen wood cuttings or wood carvings of these early machines, the elliptical cam machines created by the German physical therapists, and they look almost identical to the Nautilus machines that Arthur created. But the reason he meant for people to go slow was so that they wouldn't tear up the machine. And, you know, by going slow, you can feel more of a lactic acid accumulation, you know, from fatigue,
sure,
which has nothing to do with growth or strength whatsoever. But the fact that you could feel it made people believe that Arthur must know what he's talking about because they could feel it. You know, the touchy-feely crowd.
Well, I mean, there was no one doing any kind of champion. Correct me if I'm wrong, but no one trained that way prior to steroids, at least, and developed any kind of championship physique.
No, of course not. Of course not. Arthur Jones.
Were there studies or anything? I mean, that people just blindly accepted this? There was, like, no studies or anything when this came out, or at least, like, warp studies to back it? It's just he said this is the way it is and listen to me, and people listened?
Well, Arthur Jones got one of the top bodybuilders out in Colorado and did what became known as the Colorado experiment with Nautilus equipment. So Arthur Jones did one set to failure in each of the major body parts with this bodybuilder, and inside of 12 weeks or some such thing, Arthur presented a before and an after picture. And the after picture showed tremendous progress on the part of the bodybuilder. And Arthur claimed that it was his one set to failure on the Nautilus equipment that made all the difference in the world. When the truth of the matter was, at night this guy would sneak out of his apartment and go down to the local World Gym and train like a son of a gun and take anabolic steroids, and that's what made him bigger, not the Nautilus equipment that Arthur was training him on. Now, that's a true story.
I've heard
that Colorado experiment made its way all over the world of strength. And, you know, some of the screwballs believed, you know. They believed Arthur, and nothing could have been further from the truth.
Well, a lot of people, too, that will say they're doing high-intensity training, they're, they might do one set to total failure, but they did a lot of sets prior to that.
Yeah, exactly.
They act like they don't count.
So much for one set, right?
Yeah, it's like, okay, I'm doing bench press 405 to failure, but then you did, 365, 380 prior to that, so it looks like those didn't count because they weren't all out failure.
Didn't they? Exactly. Yeah, it's just hilarious. But that's the way Arthur was. Remember I told you I busted up my leg at a competition right before I went to Russia? Well, right before I went to Russia, I was out visiting Arthur Jones in Ocala, Florida. He invited me out there because he wanted to do some testing on me. So he put me on his machine. It was to test how strong my legs were. And I said, Arthur, I just tore my quad. You can't test my leg. He said, don't worry about it. Sit down and do it anyway. So I said, okay, I'm not going to push hard, though. And Arthur said it doesn't. I said, okay, ordinarily I would have, smacked Arthur once or twice and said, "Didn't she hear what I said?" But I figured I'd humor him, and I got on the machine and I did some leg extensions, and that was the end of it. Well, wouldn't you know, a month later, Arthur had written an article, and he got into all the magazines, that Fred Hatfield has the weakest legs of anybody I've ever tested in my life.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. And he said he has absolutely no white fiber at all. His legs are comprised completely of red fiber. And he was scratching his head how I could possibly have squat 1,000 pounds on my weak legs. But the real story was I didn't push. I didn't even do anything. I just straightened my legs out.
Wow.
That's the way Arthur was,
How long has he been dead for?
Oh, I guess a couple of years now.
Okay.
3 years maybe.
When did Nautilus kind of was about the 60s or so?
I think the Nautilus machines started coming out in the late 60s, maybe early 70s, right in there, right in that range of time.
Did you yourself ever train with when you were competing? Did you train with any other top powerlifters or anything, or did you kind of do just off by yourself, or?
No, I trained with some pretty good powerlifters. I had a team of my own when I owned a gym down in New Orleans.
Okay.
And Randy Wilson was a national champion. Joe Bradley was world champion. Ronnie Noonan was a national champion. I had a small handful of guys that were just tremendous lifters. Mitch Mignano made the Olympic team in weightlifting, and we had a bunch of really, really strong guys. In fact, pound for pound, I would venture a guess that Joe Bradley was probably one of the best lifters that ever lived. But he was the first guy ever to triple bodyweight bench press. It was tremendous,
Are you still working out much nowadays?
I work out almost every day to some degree. Okay. But I've been a little sick lately. I had a flu, and right before that I had a broken leg. I fell off of a box and broke my leg. So I've been kind of laid up a lot lately. But yeah, I work out. I'm still on hormone therapy from the fact that I had cancer, and because of that, I have little or no testosterone. So it's very difficult for me to make any kind of gains at all in strength or muscle size without any testosterone. But I'm trying to stay reasonably in shape, and the good old days are gone, though.
I saw an article, it was on a mainstream news source about you cutting out carbs with the cancer.
Yeah, a ketogenic diet. I followed a very strict ketogenic diet for a week, and I followed up about once a month for 4 or 5 days, once a month, with this very strict ketogenic diet, and convert my body into a ketone burning machine instead of a sugar burning machine or carbohydrate burning machine. And to the best of my possible knowledge, that the high ketogenic diet starved off the cancer, and it was gone. Inside of days, it was gone. The doctor had just given me 3 months to live, and I went on a ketogenic diet. And a few days later, I had bone biopsies done because it had metastasized to my skeleton, and it was gone. The cancer was just gone. Now, the only thing I did any different at all was ketogenic diet. So, of course, I also am very quick to attribute it to a loving Father in heaven. Somehow or other, he had something else for me to do. And it was not my time to die.
Gotcha. Are you a born-again Christian?
I am a Christian, yes, indeed. I spend time writing spiritual stuff on my Facebook page.
Okay. What kind of church do you go to?
I do not go to a traditional church. There's a group of us who get together at least once a week, sometimes more, and we discuss and we exhort one another and all that kind of stuff. Everything by the book.
Awesome. Excellent.
I'm not a big believer in the traditional church world. I think they're doing way too many things wrong, but that's another whole story, which don't quote me on that. I think, that's something that's very personal to some people.
Sure. Okay. Well, anything else you want to add about anything?
I can't think of anything. Not off the top of my head.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate your time.